Welcome to the Legacy Warriors podcast, where we're going to be breaking down LFA 201, which goes down in Brazil. And we got two title fights at the top of the bill. In the main event, we got Rose Conceicao taking on Lani Silva for the Women's Strawweight Championship. And then in the co-main event, we got Marcos Degli taking on Lincoln Santos for the Interim Flyweight Championship. And we got 13 other fights as well. So 15 total fights going down in Brazil. I believe the LFA likes to go to Brazil at least 3 or 4 times a year. And they usually put on some great shows with some solid undiscovered talent. And we'll be able to see those guys, obviously, on this card. Reminder, the way that I am able to figure out how good these fighters are and what they bring to the table is thanks to the MMA Fight Archive. We are closely and slowly approaching 5,000 fighter profiles on the service so that you have direct links to past fights for all these fighters so that you know what to look for when they step foot into the cage. We cover 19 different promotions from all over the world, and we have close to 110 subscribers on the service as well. You get a 7-day free trial to check it out for free with the link in the description below. Once again, check out the MMA Fight Archive and make sure you leave no stone unturned. All right, getting back to this LFA 201 card again, 15 fights to talk about. I'm not going to spend too long on every single fight. I'll get through it as briefly as I can here. And remember, this is an appetizer to the UFC 312 card, which goes down on Saturday. So if you haven't already looked into the 312 card, I have the full card breakdown, not to mention all the other great content that I normally drop for UFC fight weeks. But you guys are here for the LFA. So without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy. First fight of the night, Eduardo Dutra coming in at minus 700, going up against Sergio Murilo, who comes in at plus 500. Now, Dutra comes in with a 3-0 undefeated pro record. He's the BJJ black belt and does a great job in terms of taking opponents to the ground and finding either control time or submissions as well. I was impressed from what I saw with him over the course of 15 minutes in his last LFA matchup, and I believe that he can do enough here to grind out Sergio Murilo and end up getting his hand raised. I'm kind of surprised that Dutra was only around that minus 700 line. Dutra, I should say. Usually we see these types of matchups way more in the minus 1,000 range. So if you want to parlay Dutra, this is kind of the limit that I would put him at. But I think Dutra will go out there and absolutely cruise in this matchup and get his hand raised. Next up, Pereira coming in at minus 135, going up against Fernandes, who comes in at plus 105. Now, this is a great matchup between two women who have relied heavily on their striking in the last couple of fights to try to get their hand raised. Fernandes, a little bit more of a bully, likes to try to take her opponents to the ground in previous fights, but she's gotten 3 straight fights now, I believe, where she's been able to knock out all of her opponents, and I believe that is giving her some confidence coming into this matchup and showcasing that maybe she can go out there and actually strike. Unfortunately for her, I think that will be a bad idea to do it against somebody like Pereira, who in my opinion is this far superior striker here. I think Fernandes is going to have to get to a grappling if she hopes to have success in this matchup, but I think Pereira has improved her grappling defense enough that she should be able to keep this fight upright and absolutely butcher Fernandes on the feet. So I do like Pereira here. Kind of surprised she was originally the slight underdog, but now finds herself as the slight favorite, and I think that's the accurate spot here. So give me Pereira, and I think she wins this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Mustafa Salehizadeh coming in at minus 1,500, going up against Wellerson Oliveira, who comes in at plus 850. Now, Mustafa it was a part of the Iranian national wrestling team back in 2020, but has joined forces with the TriStar gym over there in Montreal to start pursuing an MMA career. He has a 2-0 record, but has been finding trouble in terms of guys that were willing to fight him, especially this early in his pro MMA career. Usually the payoff isn't worth it going up against somebody with such a highly accredited wrestling game, but luckily the LFA has snatched him up here and will be able to give him some more fights and hopefully make it to the UFC sooner than later. I believe that this is a smash spot for Mustafa. Wellerson usually comes in and does a job for a lot of the guys. He's even faced, I believe, Thiago Silva, who fights later on this card, and he got absolutely smashed by him. I'm expecting Mustafa to do the same here, run through him, and get an early finish. Next up, Victor Gabriel coming in at plus 600 going up against Marcos Aurelio, who comes in at minus 900. I believe this is a setup spot for Aurelio to go out there and showcase his skills once again. Last time around, he put away his opponent pretty easily, and I think with his fast twitch muscle, his speed, his footwork, his aggressive BJJ game as well, I think he's going to be able to go out there and really touch up Gabriel, who has a decent strength of schedule, but it's clear that once he starts to get touched up by his opponents, his morale starts to break, he starts to falter in terms of confidence, and from there, opponents are able to go out there and finish him, which is how he has lost all 3 of his matchups. I'm expecting Aurelio to do the same thing here. Minus 900, a little bit far out for my range in terms of what I feel comfortable parlaying, but I do still think Aurelio goes out there, does the damn thing, and gets a finish by round 2. Next up, Guilherme Uriel coming in at minus 170, going up against Thiago Silva, who comes in at plus 140. Now, this is a heavyweight matchup between 2 guys that are more so BJJ specialists. Uriel normally goes out there and looks to bulldoze his opponents, get them to the ground, either by knocking them out or dragging them to the mat and eventually finding some success from that top position. However, in his lone professional loss, he was a guy that just went balls to the wall in terms of just throwing big power shots. His opponent was able to survive it, and he ended up gassing out, and that allowed his opponent to TKO him at the ending of the first round. He doesn't really have much method to his madness. He's strong, he's powerful, but if he can't get that early finish, especially with this fighting style that we've come to know from him, he usually ends up coming up short against most guys that are able to survive that early onslaught. And I think Silva is a little bit more well-rounded than him. I think he has a slightly better striking game, and I think he also has a slightly better top game as well if he's able to get that top position here. Silva at plus 140 is not a bad consideration, considering he's gone into deeper water and had success in the past, and also has a much tougher strength of schedule. Obviously, low-level, sloppy heavyweight matchup coming up here, so it could go either way, but I don't mind the underdog odds that we're getting here on Silva. He just needs to roll with some of the shots, maybe get a top position here, and I think he can eventually pound out Uriel by wearing him out. So give me Silva to pull off the upset. Next up, Natalia Alves coming in at minus 600 going up against Noira Ferreira, who comes in at plus 425. Now, Alves is an undefeated fighter with a 2-0 record inside the LFA cage. Last time around, she went a full 50 minutes, grinding her opponent out and utilizing some striking to eventually set up her takedowns to get that top position. Gotta say, I wasn't the most impressed from what I saw with her that night. She goes up against a BJJ purple belt here in Ferreira, who doesn't have a bad grappling game of her own. She can go out there and be very aggressive off of her back if that's where she finds herself, but she also does a good job in terms of improving her striking so that she can set up her takedowns and have some success from there. I do believe Alves is a little bit more well-rounded. I think she's just a little bit ahead of Ferreira at this spot, but not at the point that I'd be willing to parlay her at minus 600. Again, these are still very young women inside their careers, and we've seen women in the LFA really come up short, especially when they're given a big spot too early in their career, and I feel like that might end up being the case here for either one of these women. I won't bat an eye at anybody looking to take the plus 425 on Ferreira, but I still have to go with Alves here in terms of a prediction. I think she'll be able to get those positions she needs to grind this out and end up winning it on the scorecards. Next up, Pedro Dantas coming in at plus 145, going up against Gustavo Henrique, who comes in at minus 175. We'll start off on the Dantas side, who is a 5-0 prospect, finishing every single one of those opponents. He's competed for Jungle Fight over his last 3 fights and showcased some solid striking and some slick submission games as well. He's a pretty lanky fighter for this division, which allows him to sink in anaconda chokes and threaten with that front choke series. But even off of his back foot, he does a great job in terms of utilizing his speed and his straight shots down the pipe to touch up his opponents. Henrique, on the other hand, made his short notice LFA debut last time around in November of 2023, and that was a fight where it seemed like his grappling was slowly paying off for him, but he started to slow down later on in that matchup and ended up eating a legal up kick, which he saw as a way to take an exit out of that matchup. In my opinion, it seemed like a soft kick, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but it looked like he was looking for an exit, and he was able to get the win there by disqualification. He's strong, has a decent top game, but not the best cardio. His striking, a little bit wild, a lot of power, but he can be touched up by better strikers. I'm kind of surprised that Dantas is the underdog here. I think a lot of it has to do with this being his LFA debut, and a lot of people may be thinking that Henrique could be able to get him to the ground and grind him out. But Dantas is very active and aggressive with his jiu-jitsu game, and I think he'll be the technically better striker as well. So give me the underdog here to touch up Henrique and possibly find a submission later on in this matchup. All right, next up, Maxon Lee coming in at minus 450, going up against Philippe Zacaron, who comes in at plus 350. Now, Lee is a very tall and lanky bantamweight coming in at 6'1" with a 75-inch reach. You could see that discrepancy in terms of his height and how often he'll have that, especially in his last matchup, which was his LFA debut, as he went out there and was able to defeat Matias Suarez with a nasty uppercut and then followed that up with the submission win. He's very long and lanky, like I said, so that will obviously help him with the submission game. He comes from a Sanda and striking background, but my qualm with him in the past was the fact that he took a very long layoff before his return in 2023. But he's facing very lackluster competition, which allowed him to go out there and have the record that he has. I'm kind of surprised that he's such a big favorite in this matchup against Zacaron, who seems to be a decent 8-2 prospect. He went overseas for his last two fights, went 1-1, picking up a split decision victory over a 9-4 opponent last time around. But he seems to have the basics of the Muay Thai and submission game under wraps, which allows him to be effective against a lot of his opponents. I think he can chip away at the lead leg of Lee here, stay away from too much of the danger in the grappling realm, and I think he could have a shot to actually pull off the upset as a plus 350 underdog. I don't get the hype on Lee. He was a decent underdog in his last matchup, and now to go out there and just get an uppercut club and sub victory, even though leading up to that he didn't look like anything special, I was kind of surprised that the public is jumping on him so much here. So I'm going to go with Zacaron to pull off the big upset here. Again, Lee could end up being the shit. He could end up being the goods, but there needs to be more work from him and proof that he deserves to be a minus 450 favorite in a spot like this. I do believe Zacaron has the skills to pull off the upset though. So give me Zacaron. Next up, Cassio Jr. coming in at minus 425, going up against Kawi Vaz, who comes in at plus 325. Now, last time around, I was finally able to cash against Cassio Jr. as I took Jose Ferreira as an underdog. I believe it's Jose Ferreira. Jose Ferreira. In June, he was able to go out there and absolutely squash Cassio Jr. and finish him in the second round. Jr., can crusher, in my opinion, usually goes out there and bulldozes his opponents with big shots down the pipe, wide winging hooks actually. Then if that doesn't pay off, he looks to get them to the ground and utilizes BJJ approach from there. He's been lucky that a lot of his opponents have just been intimidated by him, and he's been able to go out there and bulldoze them. Vaz is a fighter that just turned 20 back in November, but he has 16 fights of experience. The promotion that he's been fighting for as of late is actually the promotion run by the gym that he fights for, and they've kind of given him some layup spots, but they do sprinkle in some challenges every now and then. But when he does get those challenges, he ends up coming out short in those matchups. He seems to have all the basics down, decent striking, decent grappling, but this seems like a spot that Junior should be able to go out there and run through Vaz and do what he does best, and that's can crush. At minus 425, though, I don't have the confidence in him, because if Vaz can survive that early onslaught, he might be able to pull away late in the second and third rounds, and that should be enough for him to maybe find a submission or a late finish, considering the cardio advantage he could hold in this fight. It's not enough for me to want to take the plus 325 shot on him, though, hence why I'm going to go with Junior here to end up winning this fight early with an early finish. All right. Next up, Rafael Pereira coming in at minus 160, going up against Janderson Barreto, who comes in at plus 140. Now, Pereira had a 3-fight losing streak back in 2017 and 2018, but has now made way for a 7-fight winning streak. He's fast twitch, a lot of explosivity, doesn't do anything half-assed. A lot of his kicks are just with insane power. His punches, his scrambling as well. When he's trying to defend takedowns, he scrambles and explodes into, leg locks or reversals or rolls so that he can get out into either a more dominant position, or he can go out there and get back to his feet so he can get back to his striking game. He has a little bit of a tepid pace striking approach, which gives me some pause, especially when he is going to fight somebody with, just as good, if not better, striking game, and a guy that might be able to put him into some precarious positions on the mat. He goes up against Barreto, who comes in with a 9-0 record, finishing 6 of those 9 wins by knockout. He looks like a little bit of he's a youngster. I believe he's 22, 23 years old. Doesn't look like he has a lot of power, but he's been able to knock out 6 of his 9 wins, like I said. Long, lanky, a little bit active with his striking game as well, which makes him dangerous, and his grappling game allows him to really stay competitive should he get taken down by either throwing up submissions, looking for reversals, and working back to his feet. I think Pereira is the side here, but I think that his slow pace in terms of striking could leave some openings for Barreto to either get ahead on him or land some big shots, overwhelm him, and run away with this in deep water. The spot that intrigues me the most is the under 2.5 at even money, as I think both these guys pack the power to knock each other out. But again, the concern on the Pereira side and trusting him as a favorite is that he may not throw enough and he could get clipped on a counter, especially with some of the times where he overthrows on his strikes. I will pick Pereira because I just think he hits with a little bit more power and a little bit more sting, and that could lead to him getting the finish here. But Barreto is definitely live to pull off the upset. I'm going to go Pereira as the prediction, but my favorite spot would be the under 2.5 around that even money line. All right, next up, Andre Vieira coming in at plus 475, going up against Vladimir Dayneko, who comes in at minus 650. This is seemingly a squash match for the Russian fighter coming in here, as Vieira is a pretty much out-of-shape middleweight fighter. His last one was against a 43-year-old juicehead who had close to 60 professional fights, and it was 5 rounds of just both these guys clinching against the cage, jockeying for a position, and not even landing all that much damage. But he slows down pretty quickly. Obviously has a little bit of power considering he's a heavyweight, but he's not that great of a fighter. Dayneko going out there, 11 of his 15 wins coming in the first round, showcasing what kind of fighter he is. He goes out there, bulldozes his opponents, landing big strikes, looking for trips and throws, and then smashing his opponents from that top position. I expect Dayneko to go out there and flatline Vieira within 4 minutes, and that's why I don't mind the under 1.5 around that minus 185 line, and I wouldn't mind parlaying him up at that minus 650 line because I think there's just a giant skill gap, but most importantly, it's that aggressiveness of Dayneko that's going to cause Vieira a ton of trouble here. So give me Dayneko, and Dayneko by squashing in that first round. All right, next up, Paulo Henrique coming in at plus 170, going up against Vladimir Kanunnikov. Sorry, let me get this right. Kanunnikov, who comes in at minus 200. Now, I originally came across Paulo Henrique back in 2023, where he competed on the PFL Challenger Series twice in the span, I believe, of 8 weeks. He came up short in the first fight against Manuel Sosa. Although he showed some decent defensive grappling, he still ended up getting held on his back, and that was not enough for him to get the win there. The next fight against Kenley St. Louis, rinse and repeat. St. Louis was able to get him to the ground, keep him there, land a good enough damage from that top position, and continuously put him there over the course of 15 minutes to win that fight on the scorecards. Since then, he is now 4-2, but most recently losing a fight overseas to a 42-fight veteran, Raul Taturari. I believe he's a Georgian fighter that's competed for KSW and a bunch of other promotions over there. Henrique got submitted in the first round in that fight. Kanunnikov rides an 8-fight winning streak, hoping to get onto the UFC's radar with a victory under the LFA banner. He's only lost to highly touted regional fighters, two guys back in 2017 and 2019. Outside of that, he's done a great job in terms of utilizing his striking game to set up his wrestling, where he's just very good in terms of controlling opponents from that top position. He's a BJJ black belt as of December, and it looks like he utilizes that style very effectively. I expect him to do that here against Henrique, who might have a little bit of a height and reach advantage and a little bit wild and aggressive in the Muay Thai realm, but that allows openings for Kanunnikov to get this fight to the ground and do what he does best, and that's grind opponents out. At minus 200, I think this is a safe spot for him to go out there and just really muzzle a very aggressive fighter and pick up a victory in his first LFA matchup. Next up, Jose Delano coming in at minus 210, going up against Abu Muslim Alikhanov, who comes in at plus 180. Now, Delano had his 11-fight winning streak halted by UFC veteran Gabriel Santos 2 years ago. Since then, he's put together two more dominant victories, most recently finishing an 18-6 opponent back in March. He is a surgeon when it comes to his striking game, putting combinations together, nasty kicks, good punches down the pipe, sets his strikes up very well, counters very effectively too, and he has a decent enough grappling game to stay out of too much trouble there. Trains out of Brazilian top team, very solid fighter, and I think this is a guy that actually deserves to be on the UFC roster. It would just be nice to see him a little bit more active, because I think if he got a few more fights in after that Santos fight, he probably would have already been in the UFC. He's going up against Alikhanov, who's 34 years old, has a 7-0 record, obviously from Dagestan, but it seems like the majority of his training has taken place at Tiger Muay Thai, but most recently has joined up with the guys down there at Shoot to Box Diego Lima in the last 3 or 4 weeks to finish off his camp. His entire game is centered around taking opponents down and grinding them out. Striking leaves a lot to be desired, and that's where I think Delano could potentially take advantage of him. I think Delano's defensive grappling is good enough to keep this fight upright and then touch Alikhanov up on the feet, going on to win this fight on the scorecards. But it's tough for me to build up the confidence to try to fade an undefeated Dagestani fighter who may not have shown all of the wrinkles to his game as of yet, but this will be his opportunity to do so, even though it is a giant step up in competition for him compared to what he's been fighting in the past. I still like Delano here. Don't want to bet him at minus 210. I kind of just want to sit back and see how this fight ends up going, shaking out. But I do think Delano ends up getting his hand raised, and I think it comes on the scorecards. All right, the first of two title fights, the interim men's flyweight championship on the line here as Marcos Degli comes in at minus 240, going up against Lincoln Santos, who comes in at plus 205. Now, starting off on the Degli side, who is on a 9-fight winning streak, and he dominated his last opponent in July, ground and pounding his way to a victory. He's primarily a grappler, but we did see him show off some solid striking skills against Murilo. I can't remember his first name, a guy that was supposed to be a better striker. Degli was able to hurt him in the first round. He got to his grappling in the second round, but in the third round, it seemed like his cardio started to impact him. He lost that round on all 3 scorecards, but luckily did enough in the first 2 rounds to still get his hand raised over Murilo. Luckily for him, he was fighting an easier opponent last time around, and he was able to get the finish. But I do have some question marks about his cardio should he get into deeper waters. This is a fight that this is a fighter where all 3 of his losses have either come by decision or him being finished in the third round. The other fight of his that went to the scorecards, like I said, against Murilo, he ended up losing that third round pretty convincingly. Again, on the ground, very slick, good submission game, improving striking, but it's that cardio that I have an issue with, especially coming into his first 5-round fight here for an LFA title. Santos, on the other hand, has a 4-0 record in the LFA, currently rides a 3-fight winning streak, finishing all 3 of those fighters as well. He comes from a Muay Thai background, but he's been heavily leaning on a grapple-heavy approach where he's been able to grind opponents out and eventually find positions to get the finish. I believe his last fight was the one where he grinded his opponent out and then eventually landed a Dan Henderson-type bomb with 1 second left on the clock that put his opponent away. He's very strong, very impressive, and obviously very good with his striking game. If his takedown defense and grappling continues to showcase its improvements, I'm more than happy to take him here at plus 205 as the underdog, as I think he is the better striker. I think he has better cardio, and his grappling is up to snuff here, that I believe he should be able to stay safe enough should Degli have any success early on in this matchup. When this fight gets into deeper water, look for Santos to start pulling away, and I think his style will be more effective, and I think that will lead to him eventually getting a finish in the third or fourth round. Again, plus 205 is a tremendous line to take a shot on a guy like this. Obviously, the early finishing danger is there for Marcos Degli, but if Santos can just continue to show those grappling improvements and then get to his striking game, I expect him to start running away with this matchup. And like I said, get that finish in the third or fourth round. And new interim flyweight champion, Lincoln Santos. All right, that brings us to our headliner here, which goes down in the women's strawweight division between, I guess, the undisputed LFA strawweight champion here in Rose Conceicao, who comes in at plus 140, going up against Lani Silva, who comes in at minus 160. Last time around, Rose Conceicao came up short on her bid on the Contender Series as she went up against a very difficult opponent in Alexei Tainara, who controlled that fight from minute 1 to minute 15. And I think it made Conceicao look worse than she actually is, hence why she's the underdog in this matchup. Conceicao has a natural wrestling background, but it doesn't seem like she showcases it all as dominantly as we would expect her to showcase it. Her striking, not that bad either, throwing great combinations with her Muay Thai approach, but it's clear when fighters are either better strikers or better grapplers than her, that's where she'll end up struggling. But luckily in this matchup against Lani Silva, who is a very solid kickboxer and Muay Thai specialist, we've seen Silva struggle in the past with her grappling, and if Conceicao wants to stick with that game with the wrestling, she might be able to keep Silva in some bad positions. Credit to Silva, though, who is now a BJJ purple belt, who earned it earlier this year. She's improving her submission game. She's throwing up submissions. She won her last fight by heel hook. She wants to stay active even if she ends up getting taken down, but I think Conceicao has a good enough scrambling game and BJJ game of her own that she should be able to stay out of too much danger should this fight hit the ground, which is where I'm expecting the majority of it to take place. I don't think Silva can assert her striking effectively enough here to actually cause Conceicao too much trouble. She might have glimpses of success, but for the most part, I think we're going to see Conceicao successful in getting this fight to the ground and then grinding it out from that top position. So give me Conceicao here, and I think she successfully defends her title. It might be close. I understand why the odds opened up at a pick-em price, but I'm kind of surprised that it went so far into the Silva side here to make Conceicao plus 140 underdog. But even if it was a pick-em, I'd still go with Conceicao here, and I think she grinds this fight out and wins it on the scorecards. There you guys go. Full card LFA 201 breakdown for you guys. If you can't figure out which plays I actually ended up making through these 15 fights, I believe I have a total of 9 fights that I've pulled the trigger on. You can find that at the MMA LOT and Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. Let's try to cash as an appetizer for the UFC 312 card, which goes down on Saturday. Remember, this is Friday night that this LFA card goes down. All right, I'll be back tomorrow to talk about the free parlay, Lucky Two-Step, Lucky Trinity, as well as the prop drop, going over every single UFC fight and talking about my favorite props on those fights. Make sure you guys tune in for those. See you guys then. Peace.